All right, we are recording.
Excellent.
So I'll go ahead and I'll just do a little bit of co-op business here at the beginning. Welcome everybody. Thanks for coming along and listening to Brandon tonight. He's going to talk about editing and getting the most out of your indie production with editing. As all of you know, I'm Rob Kenzie, or most of you except maybe Chuck know, I'm Rob Kenzie. I'm the director of the Northern Virginia Motion Picture Co-op. We are a collection of artists, technicians, actors, and other creative types looking to make narrative films in Northern Virginia. But again, you already know that. So, but just to keep everybody appraised, I've been watching the numbers on the pandemic. I don't think it's the right time yet for us to jump back into production. It probably is not going to be within this year. The way that things have been going, I doubt that we're going to be able to start another production before the end of the year. But I have hopes for 2021, and we still have 3 projects that are theoretically greenlit on the development slate. But we're going to have to sort of like re-ramp everything up again. Hopefully, we can start talking about that before the end of the year. Hopefully, maybe by November, December, we'll see if a vaccine appears, if the country starts to have the pandemic under control, assuming that we, still have a government after November. There's a lot of ifs there, but hopefully sometime towards the end of the year, we can start ramping things up again. But again, this is a month-to-month thing. We'll just see how it goes. For the moment, though, we're looking for any kind of cool creative thing that we can do from home. And in fact, I was talking with Brandon a little while ago about maybe doing something over Zoom or something that we can work on in our homes and whatnot. I'm going to be posting more about that on the Northern Virginia Motion Picture Co-op group. If you're not already in the group, I think everybody here is already in the group except maybe for Chuck. But if you're not already in the group, you can go ahead and find us on Facebook, and I'll go ahead and once Brandon starts the presentation, I'll go ahead and drop a link in the text chat that you can use to check out the Northern Virginia Motion Picture Co-op Facebook group, which is where most of the notices appear. You can also, I'll give you the email address for info in the text chat as well. So if you want to find out more about the co-op, you can write there, and we can put you on the mailing list. And again, hopefully before the end of the year, we can figure out what the next step is going to be. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn things over to Brandon. Brandon, thank you so much for joining us. Everybody, this is Brandon Carr. He is an editor, and he has worked on a couple of different co-op productions, and also he's done a lot of editing of like corporate and industrial material as well. And I'm going to go ahead and let Brandon give his own bio, actually, and do his own introduction. Everybody, welcome, Brandon.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. Hopefully this is going to be fun and not boring. I actually find editing and the whole process of putting a film together kind of fascinating and exciting. So hopefully I can get that across a little bit. We're just going to do an overview of editing, how to make it work for small productions and make them feel like bigger productions. As Rob said, my name is Brandon Carr. I mainly do government videos. I work for a government contractor, so a lot of informational, testimonial, motion graphics, things like that. That's typically what I do. And then with the co-op, I've been able to do some narrative editing and worked with Rob a couple times now on putting some things together. In fact, one of the things that we worked on was a short project called To Whom It May Concern, which I was also in. So I got to be part of the whole process, which was mortifying if you have ever edited something that you yourself are in, and then have to look at yourself over and over again. But then you also get to pick your best takes and best angles. So that's always nice. So I'm going to just get into it. I'm going to throw up a presentation. I'm going to include several examples from To Whom It May Concern, because that was something that we spent a lot of time on. that the budget was relatively small for, but a lot of effort and a lot of time went into making it look and feel like a much bigger production than it actually was. So let me do this. All right. Okay, can you folks see the slide? Yes, I see nodding. That's good. All right. Like I said, we're going to talk about getting the most from editing. So we're going to go through some of the steps: logging and organizing, gluing it all together, color, visual effects, audio, fixing it in post, which we actually have some examples from To Whom It May Concern for, putting it all together, and some resources for how to do this without stressing yourself out financially or banging your head against the wall. So logging and organizing is basically taking all of the footage that you've shot or has been shot for you and doing intake with it and pulling it in and labeling it. Labeling your footage is absolutely key, because depending on the size of what you're working on, you may have hundreds of separate files or separate sections in files. Even labeling by time code, things like that are really important, because at some point down the road, you're going to think, you know what, I liked that one take better. And you're going to have to dig through a whole bunch of footage. Sorry, I have a very squeaky chair. You're gonna have to dig through a bunch of footage to try and find that if you have not labeled everything. And in fact, label everything. So not just your footage, label all of your files in a proper way. Make sure that your audio is all labeled and you're putting it in folders, and organization is incredibly important. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself tied up in knots later on trying to find things. And I say this very much from experience, because not just myself, but I've worked with other editors who've not taken the time to label, and it has caused a lot of chaos. It wastes time, which is part of your budget in a lot of ways, because you want to get your project done. You want to get it done in a timeline. With To Whom It May Concern, we had an end date that we needed to hit eventually, because we had a premiere. And so because I did a lot of labeling early on, as Rob and I were doing the last pieces of editing and putting things together, it was easier to find things and go back through and pull things out. It could have been better. It always could be better. So try and do it as much as you can and make it consistent, so that if you are logging your footage by scene, or if you're doing it by reel, or however you want to organize it, you organize it that way, but make it consistent across the board, so that if you have to hand it over to someone else for whatever reason, then you can explain your system, or just for yourself, just for your own sanity, being able to keep track of everything. And within the files, you can use metadata, and that's going to help with, there are tons of things that you can put into the metadata that can break it down, again, by scene, by reel, however you want to organize things. And there's a little bit of ambiguity in the things that I say, because I don't know, not every editor works the same way. There are different workflows, there are different labeling methods, there are different ways of using metadata. If you're new to editing, you'll figure out your own way as you go. There is no one proper way, which is both very freeing and very aggravating, especially if you're working in a collaborative space. Yes, Rob?
I just want to note that for a lot of more modern cameras, there are ways to set up the cameras to automatically encode metadata on the files that it is recording. When on To Whom, I would have loved to have done that. We did not do that, but mostly because we didn't have the time to set things up at the beginning. But if you can get that taken care of before you even go to editing, when you're shooting, the more work you can do in terms of logging and labeling things while you're shooting and while you're in production, the easier and faster the editing process becomes.
Absolutely. Thank you. Very good point. And what that metadata is for, and why all of this is important, is because you're going to need to find things. You're going to need to track things down. There's going to be that moment later on when you think, there's this one little bit that we could use as an insert, or there's this one piece that is not necessarily missing, but maybe it would work well here. Because the editing process, at least in the offline editing, then that is a little bit flexible, and you're going to be making changes until you lock everything down. And we'll get into that in the next section. Logging and labeling is tedious and it takes a while. It's worth the effort, but if you can, make a friend do it, because that makes it a lot easier on you. And if you don't have a friend, then find someone who has nothing better to do, who can sit and go through your footage and log it. This is an important message. And actually that's going to come into play in a lot of things. Make a friend do it is a very helpful step when it comes to editing in general. Anyone
One word, interns.
I was about to say, anyone can be your intern if you want. So that is logging and organizing. It's really boring. It's incredibly important as you go along. It's going to make your life a lot easier as you go through the editing process, as you work with the director. If there's a producer involved who needs to see alternate takes from certain days or whatever, because all of that will be in the metadata. So if you can just put it in, you're like, oh, it was around 4:30 on Friday when we were shooting it, then you don't have to go through the file information. You can actually pull that up in your editing software. So after you're done with that, you got to stick it all together. And this is done in a series of steps. And the steps are, and this is all, as I mentioned before, this is the offline editing step. And this is basically putting the puzzle together without making it fancy just yet. This is shaping the pacing and the picking your takes and basically putting it together in the roughest version, essentially, that your film will be in the beginning. So first you're going to do your assembly edit, which is also known as an editor's cut. And that's where your editor is going to sit down, look at all the takes, as well as if there are storyboards, going to follow the storyboards as closely as possible. We had great shot book for To Whom It May Concern. So I knew what a lot of the intentions were for a lot of the shots, and I had the script in front of me the whole time. So I knew, it wasn't just like things were surprising me as I went along. I was able to take the different takes that we had. And why this is important is because before you really, really want to form it, you need to decide angles, and then you need to go back through and watch and make sure that it flows. There were a lot of times on To Whom It May Concern that we had multiple cameras going at the same time. And so not only are you choosing what take, but from what angle. And so that was just a quick way. I put together the first cut. I showed it to Rob. He said it was fine, I guess. And then, then we went through.
Whatever, it's fine.
Exactly. And then we went through and we worked on the rough cut, which is where you take that assembly edit and you start to refine it. And that's where you start to trim the edges of the clips. And that's where you start to make it more like the final version of the film is going to be, at least in a pacing point of view. And that's where one thing that we did, we added a lot more quicker cuts to conversations. Rob had a lot of great suggestions for how we can make things move a little bit quicker in sections that needed to, how we could let more sections breathe. And so that's how we really got a sense of what the movie was going to feel like in the end, even though it didn't have all the fancy stuff applied yet. After that is the final cut. And that's where we basically put it together. We looked at it and we said, this is it. This is, in theory, the locked and final shape of the film. And I say in theory because you never know. Things come up. Things pop up later. We'll get to that.
You suddenly realize you're missing a shot that you need.
Right. Or a person. Anyway. So with the final cut, that's when you can sit down, especially, so if you're working in a situation where you have other stakeholders who need to know how things are going, if you have a producer who's paying and wants to have an idea of how things are going, the final cut is a good way to go with it, because that's the shape of things. Your color's not done, your sound's not done, everything is rough, even though it's final, if that makes sense. And that's going to be the basis from which you're then going to shape the rest of how things are going to look, how things are going to sound, and what the final film is going to be like. On To Whom It May Concern, this is what our assembly cut, no, I think this is what the final cut looked like also. This is what it looked like in Adobe Premiere. And so, you can see that a lot of it was little tiny cuts. This is just the first part. We originally cut it in 4 parts, and this was the first part. So this times 4 was the whole film. So you can see that a lot of time goes into this. The rough cut and the final cut are time consuming, but that's basically your film in terms of the bones. This is the structure of the film. And this was it was a lot. It was a lot that went into it. You can see, if you can read the way that this palette works, you can see that there are some shots that were laid on top of others, possibly later on in the process, so that we could add different angles and things. We'll talk about why the audio lines down there are sort of bouncing up and down when we get to the audio section. But this was all the rough cut, and this included audio that was mainly, a lot of it was shot just on board the cameras. We wanted to get through the rough cut and the final cut as quickly as possible so that we could start working with the rest and start refining it. I started working with the mic'd audio later in the audio stage. Next, we look at color. And there are 2 main components to color when it comes to film. And this is really important when it comes to making whatever you're working on look bigger. Because you can easily shoot something on your phone and you can edit it and it can look fine. But if you want it to look like you didn't shoot it on your phone and it's something that's bigger, then you need to work with color correction and color grading. Now, in color correction, you're looking at things like the black and white levels, the exposure, the contrast, the white balance, and creating a visual consistency. And what'll happen, and what happened with To Whom It May Concern, is we had certain lighting constraints. There were some lights in the space that affected the way that the space was lit, even though we added additional lights as we went. And what that meant was that different shots from different angles looked different because the lighting was maybe a little bit more yellow from one side because there was a light that we couldn't turn off and, balance it out. And then from another way. So if you look at the rough, then it bounces in terms of the light. And sometimes someone will be a little bit more in shadow than you want. And sometimes something will be way too bright and we'll have to bring that down. And we dealt with all of that.
That would have to do something a little bit with the fact that we had practical lights that were on the set that we couldn't, that had to be on for it to make sense. Like, there was a light fixture that was hanging in the middle of a low ceiling that had to be on. Otherwise, it would not be clear where the light was coming from in the scene.
Right.
So that needed to be there, but that did require a lot of finessing in post.
Right. And I think we did a good job with it. I think we created a lot of visual consistency and we made it look through, for someone who doesn't know the process and who doesn't know how color correction works, they can watch it and think, oh, this all looks like it's all happening in the same space. Because that's what we're trying to do. Because even in the most controlled lighting environment, if you're doing different camera setups, you have to move your lights around. And so you can only account for so many things with regards to the color, the brightness, and all of those types of things. Now, beyond that, you have color grading, which is a stylized color scheme. And you've seen this all the time. And it's gotten a lot more obvious in films over the last, 10, 15 years, where you'll have a movie that's very orange or a movie that's very green, or if it's a DC superhero movie, it's a grayish blue, or, there's always, and it's not necessarily the whole film. Often it will be different sections like, we're in Mexico now, so we are obligated to put the orangish brown filter on everything. Or, now we're in the Caribbean, so everything is light and blue. Yes, Rob.
I just wanted to note, there is I was watching I can't remember where it was. Somebody was doing an essay on color timing on YouTube. They were talking about the most recent remake of Little Women, which takes place over the course of 2 different timelines, and the 2 timelines are color graded differently so that you are instantly aware of what's the present and what's the past just based on the color grading of those sections of the film.
Interesting. And Rob mentioned color timing. Color grading and color timing are essentially the same thing, but different processes. Color timing.
I said that because I'm old.
I didn't want to say. Because color timing literally had to do with different dyes and chemicals and essentially the amount of time that you left them in to get colorized. Color grading is all done on computer now for the, I would say all. I'm sure there are some people out there who are still doing it by hand. But on computers, we use LUTs, which are lookup tables, which are basically packaged color styles and tone styles. I don't like them very much because I don't have a lot of control, but if you're moving quickly and you've done a good job with your color correction, then it should be okay. And it should actually be easy to apply in a consistent way because you're not worrying about lights and darks. You're not worrying about color balance and things, or the black-white balance. You're looking at just sort of the toning of it. I'm going to show some examples of this. LUTs can also happen on the intake side of things. You may have a camera set up that will pull in the footage with a certain tone applied, which I personally do not care for because I like working with as raw footage as I can because I'm a control freak and I want to handle all of that in post. But I've worked on, I actually recently worked on a series of testimonial videos for VA, and the camera operator asked if we wanted to go ahead and put a filter on it during intake. Because we were working on a compressed time frame in putting everything together, and I knew I didn't have a lot of back-end editing time, I said, sure, go ahead, because we were just in one spot. There was one lighting setup, one camera setup. I wouldn't have to adjust anything. And it came through looking really nice. So there are reasons. I think in my opinion, it is smarter doing narrative filming and editing, telling stories, to give yourself as clean a slate for post-production as possible. But again, everyone works differently. So let me give you some examples. And these are, again, taken straight out of To Whom It May Concern. This is one of our actors, Margot. This was what the footage looked like as it came out of the camera. I don't know why I chose this particular shot because she's making a weird face. That's probably why, honestly. So after this, we knew that we needed to do the color correction because there's a flatness that we wanted to address, and we wanted to deepen the shadows, bring her out a little bit more. So this is what it looked like after the color correction, which wasn't a lot. Sometimes it is very subtle, but sometimes it's necessary to make your subject of interest pop a little bit more. And we also knew that for the interior shots in this cabin, at least in the beginning, we wanted things to have a warm feel. So we moved into color grading, and then we added this sort of orangey brown sort of feel to the inside of the cabin. For another section, we had to deal with two areas that basically had different approaches that were needed. And that was shooting from outside the cabin into the cabin. And if you look, there's that light fixture that Rob was talking about that shot its way into a lot of the lenses. So for this, we knew that we wanted to keep that warmth inside the cabin, but we also needed to represent darkness outside the cabin. And we were using different color grading for outside the cabin. So we started just with the color correction, getting the lights and darks the way that we wanted to. And then we put in our color grading. So that's that warmth, that's that brownish orange of the cabin. But then we also applied some shadow and some blue to the outside of the cabin. And the way we did that is through masking, which gives us the ability to work in different sections at the same time in different ways. So we basically got, we did the effects, the bluish effects just in the outside boxes. And I don't know if you can still see my face at this point, but I'm gesturing. Because you're gonna find that different areas need to be treated differently in order to continue to sell your narrative and to sell your visuals. The final example of this is we also shot some dark scenes that we needed to make sure we were going to be able to see what was happening, but also convey darkness. So this was the shot out of the camera. The room was actually relatively brightish. There were some good muted lights that were in the room. If you're on the shooting side, it's always better to go a little brighter than you need, because it's a lot easier to go dark in post than it is to go light in post. That's a little extra tip. There's a reason that you shoot day for night instead of night for day. So we took this, and once we did the color correction, it got really dark because we wanted the shadows to be dark. We wanted, the mids to be a little bit darker. And we realized that we were losing the actor who had lines and needed to be seen. So we played with it a little bit. And because there was already some light on the floor behind him, we knew we could put a little mask in there to brighten up the area around his face without it looking fake. And it may look a little bit fake now because I just told you about it, but in the moment, it's a lot more subtle. And subtlety is key when it comes to a lot of this, because it doesn't take much to alter what you're doing in order to really sell it. But it's important because we need to see Mike's face when he delivers whatever his line is, or if someone's going to, kick him back to the ground or something like that. If you haven't seen the film, I encourage you. It's fun. So beyond the color stuff, which is very important, there's also visual effects. And we know that not only are visual effects good for fun lasers and removing strings from green screen things, visual effects really applies to anything that was created and added to the film after the filming. So if you need to stick a soda can in the background of a scene or whatever, that's technically a visual effect. If you need to add, because your characters are supposed to be cold and a little puff of steam coming out of their mouths when they speak, that's all visual effects. It's not just the fun stuff, although there is fun stuff. And on To Whom It May Concern, we had a lot of fun stuff, including we had some holograms that floated in the air. And that was a lot of fun to put together. That was one of my favorite parts of this whole process, was doing the visual effects stuff, because we had some real interesting challenges. We were lucky enough that we had a practical prop that could cast the light onto Mike's face.
Many thanks to Chris Bright for that practical prop.
Yes. Thank you, Chris, very much, because that came in handy a lot. And that saved me a lot of time editing wise. And so really for an effect like this, and it was not static as you're seeing it here. There was some flickering that we added. The scanning hologram that's out there actually moves, and it works like a little readout display. And it was as simple as taking the footage that we originally started with, adding in the hologram, and then connecting the two. It was a fairly simple process that actually took a while, because selling it and making it live in the space, which is very important, took a while to complete. Now, another effect that we did that I'm actually crazy proud of, that we tried to do practically as much as we could on set, which didn't pan out. We decided that we would do it as a post-production effect, is we had Margot, again, had to fire a gun in the cabin, which for some reason the owners of the cabin were not down with us doing. So, especially because it has to hit a wall. So what we had to do is we had to put together these visual effects step by step, because it would be lovely if there was just a package that you could get that was I'm sure there are actually, but we don't have money. That's why we're talking about doing these things on a budget. So we do it step by step. Again, we start with our footage, and so Margot just pulled the trigger, pretended to fire the gun. And I will say also, like, this is a very extreme muzzle flash, but this was on screen for 1 or 2 frames. It was a very quick moment, but it made a big difference. So we started with the original footage. We added the flash. We also put a glow around it, because it does not exist on its own. It exists as part of the world. So we put a glow around it. And in the same vein, added a glow to Margot so that it was playing off her, since she was already in the scene. And then added some smoke as it was coming out. That smoke actually had to persist. So after she fired and the muzzle flash went away, the smoke was still there. And in fact, the camera cuts away and then cuts back to her, and the smoke stayed, because you have to keep that world going for as long as you can. Now, on the other side of that, the bullet hit a wall and blew out a chunk of the wall. Again, the homeowners, who very nicely lent us this cabin, said, please don't shoot holes in the walls. So we didn't, and we created this also in post. And so this started as the footage of Andy and Mike looking scared and jumping. Then we added the bullet hole. We added the debris, which we did through particles, and because it's really just little brown dots that have a nice amount of motion blur added to them. It's pretty easy.
This was all done in After Effects, right?
Yes, all of this was done in After Effects. And so there is a particle system in After Effects. We used it later also for little popping sparks that had to happen as part of one of the effects as well. It's very useful for creating these things. And we actually created two different runs of the little bits flying through the air, because there are big ones and there are little ones. And then on top of that, again, we added a little bit of smoke just to ground it a little bit more in the scene. So visual effects can be very complicated and can be layer by layer, or they can be something very simple where you're just covering something up or dropping something in or fixing things, which again, we'll get to in just a bit. But now we're going to talk about what I think is the most important part of selling something as bigger than it actually is production-wise, and that's audio.
You forgot one thing though.
What's that?
Using lens flares at any time possible in the video.
For sure. And actually, I did use a lens flare.
The more lens flares, the better.
There is a lens flare.
Who do you think you are, Nick? J.J. Abrams?
Nick loves a lens flare. We know that about him.
I love lens flares.
That's why he's our favorite cinematographer. Nick, by the way, who was just speaking, was the director of photography for To Whom It May Concern. So I was surprised that I didn't have to remove any lens flares while I was doing it. Audio is incredibly important. If you put together a video that looks great and sounds terrible, people aren't going to be into it. They're not going to buy it. If you put together a video that looks so-so and sounds great, people are going to give you more of a pass, because there's so much of a connection between sight and sound that the brain wants to fill in, essentially, that it's going to be more forgiving, and because your brain's going to notice things missing in sound more than it's immediately going to notice they're missing in visual. And so we did a lot of sound editing on To Whom It May Concern. My audio folder for To Whom It May Concern has 439 files in it for a 30-minute piece. And some of those are sound engineer beatboxing, and some of that is just us giggling and yelling and being dumb. Some of it's weird, wild sounds that we created on set, and some of it was the actual dialogue. Dialogue is obviously very important if your piece has dialogue in it. Ideally, you got good quality audio captured on set. And there are ways to do that on budget. We're not going to talk about that here because we're talking about editing right now. It gets a lot harder to clean up audio if it's muddy to begin with. With that in mind, you want to make sure, if you have a chance to talk to whoever's doing the shooting beforehand, or if you're doing it yourself, to make sure to get room tone, which is basically the sound of nothing, because there is no sound of nothing. There is a background sound at every moment, all the time. And if I were to, I don't think there's a lot of background sound right now while I'm talking, but if I were to mute my mic, you would notice, unless Zoom is doing some sort of noise canceling, you would notice that the silence happened. But if I just stop talking, there's still going to be that background noise. So when you're working with different dialogue clips and different bits of sound, if you are taking audio from take one and then audio from take two and putting them next to each other, but leaving a gap in between, the silence is going to be audible in between the two. So if you have room tone, then you can fill that space. Now you can also use that for a certain amount of noise reduction, because you can tell Adobe Audition or whatever software that you're using. I just completely blanked on what the other software is. Audacity is the free one. You can say, here's my room tone, so remove this sound from everything else. And that'll create more of an empty background in terms of the audio. Sometimes you have to create a fake room tone. And this, you may only have a very small clip of what that background sound is, because either a long stretch of room tone was not captured or because possibly things change. So this is a very strange process that Rob actually helped me out a lot with, because there were some parts that we had a little bit to work with, and it takes some playing with. It's a lot of a little bit of the quiet going forward and then backward and then forward and then backward, and making sure that, because you don't want a woo 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 kind of sound, but it needs to all just sort of blend together. So you have to overlap it. Ideally, this will not be an issue if room tone has been properly captured. We also had another issue where we had there was a hum on location that was there sometimes, and sometimes it wasn't. And unfortunately, we could not fully remove the hum from the background, which meant that we had some takes that had the hum and some takes that didn't. And since we couldn't take it out, we added the hum to the shots that didn't have it before. So we had to take that hum from the room tone from one of the hum takes and then stretch it out and apply it throughout. It was a pain, but it made for a more consistent experience, which again is what we're going for. And like I said, noise reduction is helpful, but it is possible to overdo it, because the more that you apply noise reduction through whatever software you're using, the more robotic the audio is going to start to sound. And the ear is going to be a lot more forgiving to some kind of weird, subtle hiss in the background than it is for you suddenly sounding like a robot in some sort of voiceover that you're doing. So be careful with noise reduction.
We did have a situation, I believe, if I remember correctly, Brandon, where we applied a bunch of noise reduction to start with, and we had to dial a ton of it back just because we realized that it was going way too far.
And you're being very kind saying we. That was, I went nuts with it in the beginning, and you went, why does this sound awful? And I went, I don't know. And I went back and unfutzed with 200 audio tracks. So yeah, I got a little ahead of myself.
Because you were using a lot of automated room tone, a lot of automated noise reduction, which
right.
Especially when you're working with a narrative piece, I think automated noise reduction can be your enemy. If you're just doing interview stuff, then it can definitely work. But for something where you are going to be playing around a lot with the sound and doing a lot of dialogue editing, automated noise reduction is going to, it really changes the quality of the sound, and it has I think a negative impact on what you're doing. You can always apply noise reduction, in subtler amounts here and there afterwards, but doing a big blanket noise reduction of everything at the start is just going to make it harder to match all of your different audio levels and everything up during editing, I think.
And that's how I learned that lesson. But it worked out. We went back and redid a whole bunch, because that's what you want to do with your time, right? So beyond that, you're also going to work on the EQ and compression to try and achieve diegetic sound, so that everything sounds like it's in the space, so that everyone who's talking sounds like they're in the same room as each other, so that everything has an overall correct sound for where they're supposed to be. And this can include some effects, because if you're shooting to make it seem like someone's in a cave, but the audio doesn't sound like they're in a cave, that's when you go in and you play with the controls a little bit to make it sound bigger, a little bit of, you can add dampening or reverb, any of these things to make it sound like what you're looking at, which is very important. Another component of that is Foley. And that's essentially filling in everything that's missing. And there's a lot missing, because on set, for the most part, especially if you're shooting on a budget, if you have a small shoot, then you're not pointing 20 microphones at different parts of the scene. So you're not capturing live footsteps and clinks and clanks and things that are necessary to tell that full story. It is tedious, and it is fun. And it also requires a diegetic approach, because you don't want to add footsteps to a scene that takes place in a tent, then someone's walking around outside and it sounds like they're walking across a ballroom. So it's very important that everything feels the same, and that takes some doing. It takes a lot of tweaking in the equalizer. It takes a lot of messing around with things, but it is important. And I think that it did go on for a while, but we did have a lot of fun doing the Foley for To Whom It May Concern, because I got to watch Rob stomp around in a bunch of different types of shoes and blending a bunch of sounds to make the cocking of a gun.
Throwing a sack of potatoes down a flight of stairs for a body.
Right. Well, I think that was try number 7 to get the right sound for that, because it is trial and error also, because you're looking at what's happening on screen, and then you're also throwing a sack of potatoes down the stairs and trying to see if that fits in, and then try and make it in, because sometimes you know exactly what's going to work and then it doesn't, and you have to try something else. And sometimes it does take that layering. I think for the cocking of the gun, that was 3 different sounds that we overlaid. There was opening a stapler. What else? There was
I have it right here. Actually, it just happens to be on my desk. One of these.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if I can do it properly right here.
Right.
But it's like, it's just like this. One of these. It's great for getting cocking gun sounds.
There you go. And we laid them all together because we wanted to make sure that it filled the space properly. Because one thing that I had done was I had dropped in a bunch of temp sounds or a lot of scratch tracks that I got from online sources and things like that. And some of them work, and some of them you just need to create because you want it to be how you want it to be. And someone has not already created it the way that exactly you want it to be. If you're going quickly, then there are ways to make it work and deal with the sound libraries and things like that. Part of Foley is also atmosphere. And so during the story of To Whom It May Concern, there's a storm going on outside. And throughout the whole piece, there's rain and there's wind that we can hear coming through the walls of the cabin that we added. And we had to go through and decide when these sounds were going to be louder, when they were going to be quieter, because you don't want it to be constant. And you can create an atmosphere by really establishing it up front and then just lowering and lowering and lowering it, because that's going to keep getting filled in by your audience's brain. And then bring it back up when necessary. As people are talking, you can bring it down. People will fill in that it's still raining. But then as they start staring at each other tensely, you bring those sounds back up to fill the atmosphere. Because that's a big part of it as well. Silence is a very effective technique, but not always. And if you just have a bunch of characters who are just staring at each other and there's no sound at all, it can really kill the pace and take away the believability, because we don't live in a silent world. There's always something going on. So building that atmosphere is going to remind people that they're not just watching something that someone put together, but they're watching a story, that they're watching something that is quote unquote happening before their eyes. Now, I know I spoke ill of sound libraries a moment ago, but there are some useful things that you can pull from sound libraries. There are several free ones online. There are some like Audio Blocks, which is one that I've used in the past. We pulled a few questionable thunder sounds from that one. But you can also pull down sounds from, there are those CDs that have 10 million audio effects or whatever. And I think we used at least one of those for some of the sounds, because you can take bass sounds and change them or improve them, work on the equalizer, bring up the bass. You can utilize those things without just throwing them right out of off the shelf.
I think we the gunshot was like 2 different gun sounds that had been layered together and tweaked a little bit, just to really, because the gun only goes off once. And we needed it to have a major impact. So layering, with something like a sniper rifle on top of a Magnum handgun for this piddly little gun, right?
Right.
But guns in the movies don't sound. Here's the other thing: is that like guns in the movies don't sound like guns in real life. There's so many things that in the movies sound differently than they do in real life, but everybody's conditioned to expect them to sound the way they do in films. And not in the movies. Like cars sound differently in films, guns sound differently in films, telephones sound differently in films than they do in real life.
And there are certain indicators that we are sort of taught to expect by the movies, like that sound of the bottle clinking on a glass every time you pour a glass of wine, which doesn't always happen. Like, I don't think I've ever done that in real life, but when you see it and hear it in a movie, it's like, oh, right, that's how wine works. So we did that. That got added in as well, because these are the tiny little prompts that just build that world. We added a lot of footsteps. And if this were not a Zoom thing, I was going to bring in some of the footage of just the Foley sounds along with the footage, because I was watching that earlier just for my own amusement, and it was very funny. But once you layer everything together, it works, especially once you get into music. And there are a couple approaches. I guess technically there are three. One just occurred to me. There are two main approaches as far as music are concerned. There's a score, which someone's going to write to your footage, that is nice because typically they're going to work with your rough cut and work with your time codes. And as an audio editor, you can just slap it in there and play with the volume. Or you can be working with existing music, which is a little bit trickier because the beats are not always going to line up the right way. And sometimes in this case, you have to go back in and fiddle with your edit just a little bit to make sure that things fit in. This is something that happens with the testimonial videos that I do sometimes, and with the informational videos, motion graphics, because you want everything to line up, because the eye and the ear are constantly working together. And so if you have a cut and then a major beat just a little bit off of each other, it's a little bit jarring. But if it happens together, it can be really impactful. And there are so many moments in film where that happens, and it's always such a cool moment. And if you can make that work, then shoot for that as much as you can. The third one that just occurred to me is live music, because there can also be in a sequence someone playing a piano, a guitar, something like that, which is typically going to be existing music, and that you would be hopefully taking into account during your initial assembly and rough and final cuts. But as you get into the soundtrack, that may need to be shifted one way or the other. But mostly it's going to be score and existing music. We had a score for To Whom It May Concern, which was great because the musician did a great job with it. It matched the mood really well and set it up with all sorts of time codes and things, so that I literally just had to drop it in, and then we played with how the volume was going to work, whether we needed to duck it under any dialogue or if we let it, really sing.
That was Matthew Little who did that.
Matthew Little.
Yeah, he's a professor over at Germana, and did a really, really good job for us. He was very responsive to our needs in terms of helping to set the mood.
And it was great, and it made a really big impact. And it, these are the things that add to the tension. Like, sure, you have your wind and rain when people are staring at each other, but what if you have a sustained vibrato violin note? Things like that. All of it comes together to build tension. When we did the screening of To Whom It May Concern, people in the audience jumped at the gunshot, because it was sharp and it was loud, and there was such a great build-up to it. Not only in the way that there were a lot of quick edits right before it, so that there was this build-up to it, but also just in the moment, the way that everything got shaped together. And then there's a moment of quiet, and then the soundtrack cuts back in. So using music is something you have to be careful with, because you don't want music all the time, because I'm assuming you're not making an opera, but unless you are, in which case I would love to see a small budget independent opera. And I'm not even kidding. Someone work on that. But you don't want to overdo it, because you don't want to overshadow all of the other elements. Everything needs to be done in balance. And honestly, it takes a while to figure out what that balance is. And if it's your first time out, you may not be able to find that. And we'll talk about some resources on the best way to learn some of these things a little bit later. So this is what the main audio looked like, or at least a section of it, not the whole thing, for To Whom It May Concern. And the way that I work when I set up audio is I have 2 tracks for dialogue, and they're bouncing. You can see the waveforms top and bottom, because they need to overlap, because you can't just have a clip end and another clip start. They need, in order for it to flow, then things need to overlap just a little bit. And I don't mean people talking over each other so much as that little bit of background noise or whatever needs to flow into the other. And you can see the lines that go across on those top two green rows rather. That's just changing the volume. So you can see in that very first box in the top left, the volume drops off sharply as it overlaps with the other. And again, that's just a matter of going in and checking it. Below that, the green line that goes all the way across, that was the hum that we had to put in everywhere. And that was a matter of, we just raised and lowered the volume of the hum depending on what was happening. I keep 2 tracks open for special sound effects, so that, again, I can do the dialogue bouncing thing in case things have to go over each other. Unless there are sustained effects like the rain and the thunder and the wind, they got their own tracks because they were going to be consistent throughout. And sometimes you're going to add more sound effects tracks. At one point, we had probably 3 or 4 sound effects overlapping each other. So I had a whole bunch more tracks. But this is how I start. 2 dialogue, 2 sound effects, and then, obviously music, if that's going to be in there, and then working with the master. And that is audio, which, again, if this is the only thing that you focus your time on in post, it makes a huge, huge, huge difference in how your audience is going to be receptive of what you're putting out there. Now,
bad audio will bring a beautiful looking film down, and good audio will elevate something that just looks mediocre to looking. It'll literally, if it sounds better, it will literally look better to the audience because it sells the moment better.
And I'm sure that you've seen this in action. If you've watched, there are some independent films, student films, things like that. People, especially who are still learning, who have not taken the time on audio that they've taken on video, and it has a negative impact. And you look at it and you go, it was okay, I guess. But if it had had a stronger audio track, you may have raved. You may have heard the term fix it in post before. Things go wrong and changes happen as you're shooting a film. And so you may get to the point where you say, you know what, we can't spend any more time on this. We'll fix it later. We'll make it the editor's problem. And sometimes when these things are going to pop up, and sometimes you don't. There are different things that you can do to work on things in post-production. One of those things is ADR, which is also known as looping, which is basically your actor has said something and every microphone pointed at their face can't get a good take of it because they're just mumbling, or as another option, the line may change. You may want to change what they're saying, the inflection, something like that. So this is basically getting your actor back, running the video for them, and having them speak into a microphone and then dropping it back in. This requires then going back and dealing with the same types of dialogue things that you dealt with before, except it becomes even trickier because while you were recording live audio in the cabin, for instance, if you're doing ADR in someone's apartment, then all of the sound is going to be different. The sound bouncing off the walls. So it requires more equalizing. It requires more effects to try and match the reverb of the moment, putting it actually in the room. That is the same as reshoots, which sometimes have to happen. And that's, there may be a moment where something can't be fixed. And this is sort of post-production's problem. It's also bringing back production and making it their problem because it's something that just cannot be fixed in the editing room. And these things happen. They're not great, but sometimes you need to bring, and that can also add to more inserts. So we had a few reshoots that we did for To Whom It May Concern. We also added some inserts that just kind of added to the world building. So really quick moments, just little bits that as we were going through, Rob said, it'd be great here. And there were enough of those that we said, let's just get a few people back together and make this happen. Now, there was another issue where we couldn't get people back to the set necessarily and recreate the environment. There was one piece where someone has died at the bottom of the stairs, and the other actor, it was me, is sort of reacting to that. But we never really got a shot of her in close-up so that the impact of her being dead comes before the reaction of the character that I played. So Rob went to her apartment, and I think it was her apartment, and shot an insert shot of basically just because it was in the dark, and so the flashlight.
We brought a bunch of what was it? Because like it was a wood floor underneath her, so we brought a bunch of like spare bits of flooring that I happened to have in my basement. We literally built a little set for her in the corner of a room that she could just lay her head down in.
And so then we had to not only fit that into the edit, we also had to fit in the color and the tone, and because that was wildly different from the lighting setup that we had originally had. But it worked. We absolutely pulled it off. Sometimes you have to add or remove elements. And so this could be something where, if you're shooting a period piece, and let's say you're shooting Game of Thrones and someone has left a Starbucks cup somewhere, then you would want to fix that in post. And
that
you would want to go in.
Never happen.
No, of course not. Not with all of their time and money. So you would want to go in, and there are different ways to remove things in post. And there are also ways to add things in post that you may have forgotten. For instance, we were well into the editing process before Rob and I realized that person who was dead at the bottom of the stairs was missing from this scene after the gunshot. There's another lovely face that I've frozen Margot on. Sorry, Margot.
It's the wide shot there. I remember the moment that we both looked at each other and said, wait a minute, where is she?
Where is she? And it's such a brief moment in the film. And probably, I don't know, I have no idea what percentage of people would have actually noticed it. But we noticed it. And it was going to bother us.
Is that she was sitting at the bottom of the stairs for the whole day while we were shooting in a different direction. We weren't shooting in that direction. And I was like, it looked so uncomfortable for her to be just like sitting there on her laptop and sitting in the corner of the stairs. I said, you don't have to sit there. Go get comfortable. Go relax someplace. We'll call you when we need you back. And then we forgot.
We sure did. So that became part of Rob's reshoot adventure. And so we put her in the shot, and it worked. It's knowing that this was cobbled together later and looking at it as a still sells it a little bit less. But in the moment, you would never know it. And it relieved Rob and myself as we rewatched it, knowing that it was there. Things like that are going to happen. And I have never worked with someone who has so meticulously planned something the way that this shoot was planned out. And even with the 3-inch thick shot book that we had and all of the planning and timing that went into everything, things are going to happen and things are going to get left out. And sometimes that has to be addressed in post-production. It's just the way things work. Sometimes you can let stuff go. Like we could have cheated. We could have just darkened the doorway, which I think we did discuss at one point. Or there were a lot of things that we could have done to fake it, but we had the willingness of the actor, we had the time and the weird, urge to fix it. So we made it right, and I think it makes for a stronger end product. It's not always necessary, but if you're making Game of Thrones, take the Starbucks cups out. It's important. So you got to put it all together. And that involves all of the outside elements that, because you've put your edit together, you made it look really nice and shiny. It sounds great. You've got good effects and everything. Now you may need to add opening credits and closing credits and things like that. You also need to figure out how to export or not how to export, but what your distribution method is going to be and the best way to export it for that. For instance, if you are saving it for a premiere that you're going to do via projector in front of an audience, that's going to be a different file type from what you're going to put on YouTube. And luckily, there are a ton of presets in most of the software that are going to walk you through that. There is a YouTube 1080p preset in Adobe Media Encoder that is a lifesaver because it puts everything together perfectly. if you're just doing something for YouTube. And it's always better to output a few different versions. And you always want to put out one version that is the highest possible quality. And it's going to take a million years to render, but you're going to be glad that you have it just in case everything else disappears and falls apart for whatever reason. And because I didn't mention this before, back up everything repeatedly. Because if I did most of the work on a hard drive, but I had it backed up somewhere else. If I had not backed it up somewhere else and I dropped that hard drive in a river, then not only is my work and time wasted, but every one of the actors that appeared on set, every member of that crew, everyone who worked on it, their work is gone. And that's not fair to everybody else. So back up. Because it's a lot easier to go back and work from an older version of something than it is to go start from scratch and film the whole thing again. Luckily, I don't know from experience, but I'm, common sense. So what kind of software to use? Now, I typically work with the Adobe Creative Suite, which is primarily for video. I use Adobe Premiere, Adobe After Effects, and Adobe Audition. Premiere is for cutting your footage for the most, and some graphic work. After Effects is good for actually doing effects, doing typography, and then Adobe Audition is for sound. Now, I did not use Audition for sound on To Whom It May Concern. We did all of the sound inside Premiere, which may have been a bad idea. But we started that way and we ended that way because it made more sense. It's fine. I mean, there's enough in there, and it's not like we were, depending on what you're building, it's not necessary to go through a third program. But they have it put together in such a way that the workflow and passing the files around between is pretty nice, and it's getting more and more seamless. So it helps to stick with the program that has the strengths for what you're working on. So DaVinci, with their Resolve software, which for a long time has been sort of an industry standard for color correction and color grading, they have turned their Resolve software into a full-featured editing suite. I don't know when they did this. This just came to my attention recently, but it's kind of a big deal because Resolve is very well known throughout film and in the larger industry of film. Not only is Resolve now a full-featured suite, it's free. They have completely opened it up for anyone to use. Now, they do have a pro version that gets into things like noise reduction and things like that, and I'm not sure how good it is. I haven't used it yet in terms of the non-color options that are involved. And you may want to stick with some of the other free solutions if you're trying to save money, but you're still trying to put things together. Again, Audacity is an audio editing program that is pretty great for being no cost. There are plenty out there. I'll share some more resources in a bit. Final Cut Pro is basically the Adobe Premiere of Apple products. Final Cut has had a long standing in the industry and people have their opinions on it. It's just another one. I thought I'd put it in there. But you can even work in iMovie or Windows Movie Maker or pretty much anything that's out there that is a non-linear editor, as long as you're using it right. If you're just throwing things in and chopping it up and then exporting it, you can do that in any of these. But if you're taking the time to use even the limited features of something like iMovie or Movie Maker or a billion other free things that are out there, if you take the time to make it work, and sometimes if you're trying to save money, sometimes you have to layer things because you may be working in an editing program that only allows 4 tracks or something. So you do your 4 tracks and then you export it, and then that's your track 1, and then you do it, in a whole new file. You do what you need to do in order to get all of these things to work together. Because it is possible to do most of this with just the cost of the hardware that you're using. Again, though, I use Adobe Creative Suite because that's what I've always used. And so that is my workflow. Different things work for different people. Some people can edit and do all of this stuff on their phones. And I think that's insane. I know that when I was working on doing the editing, Rob thought the way that I had things laid out was insane because I had so many of the little palettes so small that it was just really hard. you know, to think to work with, but that's just the way I'd always done it.
I want to say that what was I going to say? Sorry, it just went out of my head. Never mind. Proceed.
I was trying to use that for a drinking break. Oh well. Coffee. I'm drinking coffee. So learning. So this is important too, because I can say use Adobe Premiere, but I can't tell you right now how to use it because we only have so much time. I recommend lynda.com, which is a great learning resource. It is a paid service, except you can sign up through your local library. Not every library. I guess I should put that caveat out there. But, you know, my little town, I can go to the library, get my library card information, and use lynda.com for free. I highly recommend it. There are a lot of really approachable videos. They lay everything out in basically, you know, if this is a beginner, intermediate, you know, pro, things like that. Lynda.com is a really good resource. There's also Rocket Jump Film School, which is a lot of fun. And they show you how to do a lot of things. They talk about techniques and theory and how to do certain things in a very fun way, which is really important. I also recommend the entire internet. There are so many resources out there that if there is something specific that you're trying to figure out how to do, then look it up. You're going to find a resource. I do it constantly. I've taken so many lynda.com courses just to figure out one small piece of a video that I don't know how to do. I come into this, I didn't go to school for this. This is all stuff that I've learned on my own or through jobs or working with Rob when I learned not to put noise reduction on everything. And there are learning opportunities everywhere. It doesn't require going to film school for a ton of money in order to edit well. It might help. I don't know. I didn't do it. But I feel like I'm doing okay. Also, the one thing...
Having been to film school, I can say that there's tons of ways for you to get the education you need online right now. So, you know, before you spend a whole lot of money, you know, granted, it's a great experience and it can be absolutely awesome because you meet and work with a lot of other people who are absolutely totally focused on filmmaking the way you are. But if you don't have the wherewithal, don't sweat it. Just you know, practice.
Yeah. And speaking of, the one resource that I left off of here is other people. There are, especially like within the co-op, there are other editors, there are other creative folks, there are people who, I'm sure there are people involved who've been doing this kind of thing a lot longer than I have and a lot better than I have. And I like to learn from other people as much as I like to learn from books or videos or whatever else, because there's no exchanging that. You know, I feel like I've really learned something when Rob is standing over my shoulder saying, no, don't do that. Because that is helpful and useful to me. So having conversations with people, sending messages to people, if you guys want to ask me questions via message, you know, private message or whatever, that's fine. Because I think that's a really good way. I don't think hiding this sort of information benefits anybody. I would love for everyone to be a competent editor and make things great. Just, you know, leave some room for me every once in a while. But that is basically it. So I'm going to leave it open for questions. Let me turn off my, what have I done? Screen sharing here. There's my desktop probably. Oh, there we go. Stop share. So there we go. That is what I have to say. Any questions?
I'd probably add along maybe, well, the learning slide is probably a good spot. It took me a while to learn that when you finish your product or you think you finished, let someone else watch it and give opinions. Editing is a real easy thing to sink your entire life into and think that it's all yours now. And the way it's done is the only way it can be done. It was a hard lesson to learn to, whenever I was done with something, let someone else watch it and give opinions and actually, you know, take that advice. And because it's something that I didn't see because I was so involved in it in a different way. So I think before you push it out to the YouTube to make your millions, let someone else watch it and give some feedback too, maybe.
That's always a good idea. Getting feedback is, film is really a collaborative process because it's more than just a director or a writer or an editor. It's, I have done projects where I have been the writer, producer, editor, director, and did the musical score. And I think it's better when you have more input, when it's more of a collaborative process. It's so much work just getting any kind of a narrative film put together. It's a massive amount of work. Get help is what I'm saying. Don't unless you have that sort of like crazy monomania that certain people have, don't be afraid to go out and try and get help and recruit people and get more people involved. And definitely getting more eyes on the post-production process is part of that. Especially with Foley work and stuff like that, it's really hard to do all that on your own and stay sane while you're doing it. And I really appreciate Brandon working closely with me on the edit for To Whom It May Concern, because it was, there were a lot of late nights.
Yeah, it was fun. I had a really good time with it because I learned a lot, and because I think our product in the end was very good. We had a premiere, like I said. There were 4,000-5,000 people there. And no, did we ever get a count for how many were there? Because it was a lot.
I think it was over 100 people. We filled the room.
Yeah. Which was amazing because I was sitting at the head of the room getting ready to run it off my laptop. And every time I turned around, more people were there. And it was incredible. It was a really good feeling. And we had spent so much time on it and put so much work into it that it was very satisfying, because we felt, looking at it on the screen, like we had truly done our best, because we went through all these things that I just went through step by step and made sure that everything was the best that it could be. And this was not a $1 million production. This was not a $100,000 production. It was a very small production. And again, if you haven't seen it, well, I guess you can probably see it through the Facebook group, or Rob, you can.
Oh yeah, it's on our YouTube channel. Which is where this seminar is eventually going to land. And hang on, where is it? Well, I'll post the, I'm sure most of you know where it is already, but I will go ahead and I will post it into the chat window anyway. There you go. Boom. There's the YouTube channel for the Motion Picture Co-op. You can see To Whom It May Concern there. You can see Keys is the most recent one that we released at the end of last year. And there's a couple of other things on there as well. The seminars are all on the co-op channel as well. That's where this is going to be. It's probably going to take a couple of days. Probably go up on the channel over the weekend at some point. But anybody who wants to, who has other questions or wants advice, my DMs are always open. You can get a hold of me on Facebook, or you can write to info@novamotionpictures.com. And that goes directly to me. And I'm always happy to answer questions or try and connect people together who are working on various things. So do reach out and do check out the other things that we're doing. Hopefully there'll be more to come. All right, Brandon, do you have anything else? Does anybody else have any questions for Brandon?
I got one for you.
Sure.
Go ahead.
I was listening to you talk about sound, and I'm never going to watch a movie the same way anymore. But the times when there isn't a lot of sound, and you're saying about adding in atmospheric sound, and it occurred to me that I remember a lot of times watching movies where there wasn't a lot going on, and there wasn't dialogue, there wasn't a lot of things that were making noise. And they surged into a musical score, or you heard the musical score, and really not much else. Right. And I was just wondering what the collective opinion of that is. Is it okay to use a musical score in lieu of trying to do the background work to have that atmosphere or not?
I think it depends on. It depends on a lot of stuff. It depends on the general approach. It depends on. Because what that essentially does is that takes while putting the audience more into the moment, it also takes the audience out of the moment at the same time, because it makes it more, this is the idea of a story as opposed to this is actually happening in the moment, which background music in general sort of does, because we don't always have music playing. I mean, I often have music playing because I like having music on in the background, but I don't have like a theme that happens when I walk in the door, which is a shame.
I totally.
I think I think it can be I think it can be very effective, because music can be so evocative that it can be just the right piece to pull you through that particular moment. But it can also be really heavy-handed, because when the music is telling you what to feel in a moment, I don't like that. I'm like, my brain reacts very poorly to that. But if it's working with like an earned emotion of the moment, then I like that. And I think that's okay. It really depends to me. What do you think, Rob?
I think that music, so there's a lot of different ways you can use music in a film. And one of the ways that I like to think of music, or when you're talking about a score in a film, is that like the information you're getting is visual and audio. And like the film can't give you the feeling of the wind on your face or the smell of, when you walk into that creepy, musty old house kind of thing, or the taste of the food going into, the chocolate strawberry that a woman is, tasting on screen as she's like in a romantic situation or something like that. So to a certain degree, a score can fill in some of those missing senses. And music is very emotional. It's very evocative. To a certain degree, the score is there to tell the audience how to feel about the scene. But again, it can be really heavy-handed. There's a lot of bad examples. There's a guy named Dan Olson on YouTube who he actually talks a lot about editing, and he's got a wonderful long form piece where he talks about the horrible editing in the movie Suicide Squad. And one of the things he goes into is like the really heavy-handed, on the nose use of songs to underscore characters and scenes, where it's just like, here's Amanda Waller, she's the bad guy, so we're going to play Sympathy for the Devil, right? Hey, this scene is set in New Orleans, so we're going to play House of the Rising Sun. So it's just like really, then it can get really, really on the nose. And if you watch, like, especially in a lot of old 80s action movies, or like if you look at like old 80s fantasy movies or sci-fi movies, the soundtrack can be really, really incredibly almost intrusive and on the nose places, where it's like the soundtrack really wants you to feel this way about this film, or this scene rather. And when the soundtrack, when the music is reinforcing what you're seeing on the screen, that's good. When you're using the music as a replacement for the fact that that you couldn't get there with the visuals, that's bad. I think, like playing this huge, like very fast-paced heroic score over. There's a scene in did they even use music in that? No, they didn't even use music in that. But like, if there's a guy just like walking up a mountain and you've got this pounding heroic score over the top of it, then that's probably too far.
Unless you're doing it for comedy purposes, in which case that can work very well.
Yeah, exactly. But that you can get really unintentionally funny if the music isn't right. So it's one of the things that I found a lot of the time is that when I'm putting a film together or editing it, a lot of times sometimes you want to edit with like a temp music track in there, because that there has to be music in this scene to help to just sort of like sell the moment. That can happen a lot with like with like a creepy situation or a romantic situation or something like that. Like sometimes you want the music there because you want that sort of like cinematic feel, where that's sort of like hyper real. It's not reality, but it's sort of like a heightened reality, or it's a more sort of mythic reality or a storybook reality. And then you're definitely going to want music for that. And so you may want to put like some temporary music in place. You don't have your score prepared. You haven't really chosen your final music yet. So you throw some classical music in there, or some jazz, or whatever it is that's going to sort of like help you edit it together. But if you don't have that ahead of time, if you're not sort of like going in with that, and you're editing without a temporary music track, I find a lot of times if your visuals are really working and they're married to your audio really well, you're going to get through the end of the film. You're going to realize, oh, I should probably have some music in here, but you're not noticing it missing on the first pass through. And then when you go through, you'll say, okay, so where do we really need music here? Where is it going to do the most good? And then you can be more judicious about how you use it. I don't know. I think I'm kind of rambling there. I don't know that I'm being totally coherent.
Not you, Rob.
All right. Any other questions from the gang?
I could ask tons of questions because I guarantee I have the least experience in this, but I'm excited about the resources that you gave and the great presentation. I also have a WeWork co-op space that has a lot of people that work in LA, motion pictures and all this stuff. So now I can actually understand more of the conversations. But with my nonprofit, make a long story short, I'm trying to produce video content that is aimed at Gen Z, high school, college students on career exploration. I just don't think that the content that's out there is engaging. And speaking to someone who switched majors many times in college, led to many issues, I feel that's one of the places in higher education and college preparedness that I can add value. So because of technology, I'm able to bring in and do Zoom-like interviews of professionals in certain fields. And I'm trying to engage in splice videos that takes professionals who recently graduated, those that are maybe 5 to 7 years in, and those that are seasoned professionals, and kind of create something on someone in finance, someone that might be in a variety of fields. So it kind of can go a lot of places. But the main thing that wondering from an editing standpoint is I want to brand my videos where they'll be consistent, where they'll have 7 to 10 minutes and they'll have almost the same 5 to 7 questions. And being that sometimes with internet and capturing video and sound, you could have those moments where you have those dry patches where you might have captured something. Would you advise those primary questions that I have them maybe record ahead of time prior to my interview with them? Because my idea is I'm trying to maybe spend the very first part of the interview answering those 5 to 7 questions, and then we can kind of have just an open-end dialogue that I could utilize parts of that conversation for other social media content, whether it be video, whether it be creating a top 5 like to-do list if you're interested in a career. But I guess what I'm worried about is they're about to have a key takeaway moment of maybe something in their field, something they learned in college, and then all of a sudden the audio drops, and then I have to ask them to resend the answer, something like that. So that's where my head's been kind of going, as being that most of my productions can be done on Zoom and video over the internet.
One thing that you can do to sort of save yourself from that kind of thing is have the person that you're interviewing have a recording going at their end. I have done audio podcasts and sort of like Zoom interactions before, where it's very important to make sure that we've got good audio, because first of all, you're almost never get good audio off of a Zoom account, off of this kind of a connection. Obviously, because of the format where we have multiple people asking questions and whatnot, it's not practical to have everybody recording their own audio and then pulling it together at the end. But when you have just 2 people or 3 people talking, the best thing to do is to have everybody recording audio natively, at their location, whether it's on a digital recorder like this, or whether it's on your on the laptop itself. You can just have them get a copy of Audacity for free, and if they have a decent microphone, hook it up to their computer and record the audio in Audacity there on their computer while you're recording it in Audacity on your computer, and then You get them to Dropbox you the file at the end of the interview. They save the recording, they throw it in a Dropbox to you. You go into a piece of software like Premiere, and then you drop in the video from your Zoom call, and then your clean audio that you recorded in your location and their clean audio that they recorded in their location, and you sync it all up. And you can have them do like a little slate clap at the beginning of the interview, so that you can lock everything up at their end as well. But that's how I've seen a lot of people do it, and that will allow you to have much better audio quality for these videos, and it's going to make it look a lot more professional. Brandon, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes. No, I mean that actually absolutely covers it. And really, in fact, if there's an issue with, you may have someone who doesn't know how to install Audacity or doesn't have a video or audio recorder or whatever, the voice memo function on most phones can be a good backup if needed. Because I've done audio editing where I've had people just say lines into my phone, and I've been able to work with it in post. So as long as they're not like setting it across the room, as long as it's about the distance that a microphone would be, it's pretty workable. If it comes down to it, if it's a separate audio recorder or onboard recording, that's better. But definitely phone is an option.
If I'm using that as a backup, do I have to have them disable incoming calls or anything in that regard, or is that Trump? Okay.
Yeah,
I don't know if you noticed I had to just
do not disturb.
I don't know if you noticed I had to just get up from my chair a moment ago because an alarm went off on my phone that I forgot to turn off before we started this.
Thank you both very much. Appreciate it.
No problem.
No problem.
All right. Brandon, thank you so much. Really appreciate you guys all coming out. This is, again, it's going to go up on the Co-op YouTube channel probably sometime over the weekend. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to end the recording now. Have a great evening, everybody.